The Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Then the King will say to those at his right hand, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?" And the King will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did to one of the least of these who are the members of my family, you did it to me." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Lord. I invite you to be seated. Grace and peace, community of Emmaus, on God's Work Our Hands Sunday. God's Work Our Hands is one Sunday that reminds us that we are not alone in the work of the kingdom. Blessedly, it is not God's work, my hands, or we'd all be in trouble. The timing of this reminder is good for us. It comes on the heels of last week's teaching from Jesus about what it means to follow him. Our invitation to surrender ourselves each day anew to God's abiding presence in all life, to relax the hard edges of self-understanding in favor of aligning with God's fidelity to all creation. Sometimes this choice increases our own suffering, as it did for Jesus. But even in suffering, we are transformed in God's grace and held in God's love. Not for all, but for many of us, these recent years have delivered a significant blow to our sense of self. National and international events, wildfires and other disasters, the pandemic, increased public attention on themes of brokenness in our human community, poverty, the role of racism, gender, sexuality, all the events of our personal and private lives on top of these things on the main stage, loss of health, loss of employment, loss of loved ones. The invitation to release ourself to the God self might sound threatening when we feel as though we are melting away already and grasping desperately for some self-definition or solid ground. We may have heard this mandate last week to those who wish to follow Jesus to lose our lives for the sake of Jesus in order to find it. But this morning's gospel gives us a way to become in the God self. It addresses the tangible and daily call to not only deeply feel, but respond to our oneness as a whole creation of God. To let that relaxing of the hard edges of the self help us understand that the expansive self involves all of us, that we will not be well until we are all well. Each community member is important. Rejecting association of the self with the worldly concerns for the sake of Jesus does not involve rejecting one another or our daily needs, spiritual or physical. We are clear then, each one of us is important. We need to be retaught sometimes what it means to find our purpose and meaning when our sense of self is falling away. We need to be reminded of the good news of God's love and mercy and to be drawn back into relationship that has the transformative power to heal. Last year, activist and author Adrienne Maree Brown wrote an article entitled, "Love Looks Like Accountability." In it, she wrote, Right now, we are living in patterns of excess in which it is easy to see our relationships with others as transactional, temporary, and disposable. As a model of humanity, this one is failing us, hurtling us toward extinction. If we hope to save our species, what we want is a net so strong, so satisfying, that no one can fall through it. A healed society would be one in which no one becomes the bearer of unjust hardship, where individuals don't bear the weight of systemic failures. This is our collective work. This is what healing and accountability look like. And there are practices for weaving and trusting that net. This morning in his parable, Jesus teaches us the practices we need for weaving the net so it will be safe for all people. He reminds us that those who are hungry need food, those who are thirsty need something to drink, strangers need welcome, the naked need to be clothed, the sick need care and attention, and those in prison need our love. And though we do not always recognize that in doing these things, we do the same thing to Jesus, because of our unity, because of those soft edges of the self in the Christ and the Godhead, indeed we do each these things to Christ himself. In a time of cultural and societal turmoil, we as Jesus followers are drawn into our collective work, the practice of weaving a net so strong and so stable that no one can fall through. Any grasping for self through the rejection of our call can cease. We heard read from 1 Peter today that we are called above all to maintain constant love for one another, for love covers a multitude of sins. For the gospel writer and the epistle writer, we are reminded that love refers to an ethic for living, not mere sentiment or feeling. It is a pattern of relationship with God, with neighbor, and with ourselves. Love, not a convincingly righteous posture or a firm sense of self, is what covers a multitude of sins and is the fulfillment of law. Within the practice of love, we will rediscover our truest self. That is the self surrendered to the calling of the divine source that unites us. And so it is, God's work, our hands, not my hands, invites us particularly into what building a future and repairing our world might look like. Not as righteous, charitable saints, we come instead as loving and accountable neighbors, sinners, the lot of us. Yet even as we are persistently complicit in and contributing to these broken systems, we will persist all the more doggedly in the collective work of weaving and repairing the net that holds us. United to Christ, we open our eyes again and again to the unjust hardship in our communities. In the example of Christ, we are willingly broken open for the world. As we commit to daily choose the love ethic of Jesus, we are held fast in the strength of God's mercy and grace. In response, we are freed to graciously repair the rips and the tears that we have made in our nets, both in private and public life, and not a one of us shall be lost. Amen.